I keep going back to this idea of companion. If you break the word down, it's two Latin roots, con pane, with bread. The idea being that once you break bread with someone, you can no longer be an enemy.
Food, like life, can be complicated. That's why I'm on a quest to learn all about our food and the crimes, issues, and debates that are tied to it. I hope you'll join me on my quest to explore the dark side of dining. Imagine you are sitting across the table from your mortal enemy. Your family and theirs have been in conflict for generations. And then, you break bread and offer it to them. You both eat, savoring the earthy, slightly sweet and salty flavors of the bread. And suddenly you find yourselves united in an experience of enjoying food together. You now have a bond, and can no longer be enemies. Food is power, and ultimately food can be the greatest tool for war or peace, unity or division. I've brought on author and food scholar Darra Goldstein to talk all about this. Here's Darra.
I've worn many different hats for my paid career. I was a professor of Russian literature at Williams College, but towards the end of my career there, I moved into teaching food studies. And that's because from the very beginning, I was drawn to the study of food and the way it can help us understand other cultures. And that led me to have a second career, a dual career in food writing. And I've written, I think, 7 cookbooks, something like that. And I founded a journal called Gastronomica, the Journal of Food and Culture, which was really the first serious attempt to look at food through the lenses of poetry and art and scholarly work, but also more lighthearted things, so that the very serious academics and people in the food world, like chefs and other writers, could somehow come together and find each other and have a great community.
So Darra has had quite a bit of experience with food under her belt. One of the things that led me to invite her on the show is the fact that she has been fairly outspoken about the idea of how food can unify or divide people. So I decided to ask her about what she calls culinary diplomacy and her experiences in unifying through food. So you've also spoken about the ability for food to kind of unify or divide. So you've kind of talked about culinary diplomacy, so to speak, and how breaking bread can make someone a companion. Could you elaborate on possibly some historic or contemporary examples of where food has fostered peace, understanding, or cooperation between divided groups or nations or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I did in 2005 or 2006. I can't honestly remember exactly when it was. I was part of an international team at the Council of Europe, based in Strasbourg, France, to look at ways that food can promote diversity and tolerance. And it was a really wonderful project. And we got together 50 countries, European countries, that had signed the original European Cultural Convention. And it was the 50th anniversary of the signing. And so we published this big volume about each country's culinary traditions so that people could understand commonalities and differences. And it was this wonderful project, and one of the people on the team was a psychologist from Tel Aviv who worked in peace studies. And he invited me to Israel, where I met a young Druze man. Druze are Christians living in Israel. And we concocted this idea to try and bring people in northern Israel, the Arab community and the Jewish community, together through communal dinners. And he was a sociologist, so it was all very data-driven. And what we found was that children were so open to things, and the women tended to be too. But once people became older and hardened in their political views, it became almost impossible to have that kind of gathering without any sort of suspicion or fear. And it was quite distressing to recognize that. And with the volume that we published with the Council of Europe, there was a big kerfuffle because Azerbaijan was very angry that Armenia got more pages devoted to it, because those two are longstanding enemies, and Azerbaijan said that Armenia had stolen its food. So I keep going back to this idea of companion. If you break the word down, it's two Latin roots, con pane, with bread. The idea being that once you break bread with someone, you can no longer be an enemy. And in many societies, especially Islamic, in Islam, if you've had a meal with someone, then that person can no longer be your enemy, even if he was your sworn enemy before the meal began. So there's something about bonding over food that is really beautiful. But I hate to say that the reality of the world is such that no matter how many small projects are carried out to try and bring people together in a really positive way through food, it can happen on a tiny local level. And I'm not saying that doesn't do any good, because it enlightens a whole lot of people. But until governments and the people in power get behind this idea, I'm afraid it's not going to have a profound impact on the world. I mean, we can think of World Central Kitchen, which is run by Jose Andres, based in Washington. And he is a very famous chef, but once all these crises started happening, he put together a team, an emergency team, and he goes to crisis points throughout the world and sets up soup kitchens and shows this offer of giving to people, of sharing to people, of nourishing. I mean, it's really about nourishment and sustenance. And that kind of activity, I think, is really quite wonderful. It's a little different than just charity. There's something deeper to it.
I love the idea of no longer being enemies with someone after you've eaten with them. And it's true that there's something naturally connecting about food. And as Darra explained, there are a lot of efforts worldwide to bring people together through food. However, food can also be divisive because it is strongly tied to identity as well. Here's what Darra had to say about that.
But if you look at the food issues today, I mean, there's still enormous anger about hummus and who owns hummus. I don't think anyone should own a food, but the sense is that Israel appropriated it from the Palestinians. And it's true that hummus is an Arab food. It probably originated in Egypt, made with fava beans originally and not with chickpeas. And then there are variations all over the world. But it was the Israelis who took this idea, and then they opened hummus joints, in London and New York, and it became this global chain, and it became associated with Israel, which is understandably upsetting to those who feel that it's their food. Right now, there's a big lawsuit going on in Germany because I don't know if you've been there, but one of the most favorite street foods is döner kebab, which is a kebab, that is done on a skewer, and people really love it. And it was Turkish, and it was the Turkish immigrants who brought it to Germany, but it has sort of morphed into a somewhat different form in Germany, but it is definitely originally a Turkish food. So the Turks want to say that no döner kebab can be sold in Germany under that name, which would do great damage to the German economy, but they want to claim it as their own, and it is in litigation with the European courts. And, it's this need to assert cultural identity through food, which is a very powerful urge.
Yeah. Well, that is very interesting, kind of food being tied to cultural identity. I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and there's a very strong tendency towards tying identity with food there that I very much saw. They also have döner kebab there everywhere, largely done by immigrants. So, obviously with like the rise of globalization, a lot more cultural exchange, do you see an increasing potential for unity or more of a risk of kind of people's identities getting kind of broken down by things like, it becoming, the examples you just gave, right?
I don't think there's a risk of cultural identity being lost. I mean, even if you look at McDonald's, which you can see perhaps as a blight throughout the world, except that in many places, it's this amazing fast food place that crafts its hamburgers to reflect what local tastes are. So they're not selling American hamburgers anymore. It's an American corporation, and I'm not promoting it because personally I don't like it, but it responds to local needs. And they have found that when people immigrate, the newest generation will obviously pick up the language of the new country. But even when language is lost, the food ways are retained, if only for special occasions. So it's not that it would be every day that the grandmother's dishes are being made, but you can be sure that for birthdays, for holidays, certainly for any religious holidays, that family's tradition is going to be continued and prized. And so I don't think that the expansion of food knowledge and tastes and the globalization is necessarily a bad thing. The best cuisines have always evolved when people migrate around the world and they have to adapt to new ingredients, to new techniques, to a new climate. And so they change their foods and it becomes very, very dynamic. So you wouldn't want things to, everyone's saying, or not everyone, but people often say, oh, that's not an authentic tomato sauce like my grandmother made, except that tomatoes weren't introduced to Italy until after the Columbian Exchange, after 1492. And so it's not traditional. So I think the best thing is just to be open to all of these changes, but to retain what is personally important to you and your family.
Yeah, kind of building on this, again, for me, Italy's kind of my reference point because that's where I was at for a couple of years. I've observed how with, doner kebab, they started doing these things called kebab pizzas, where they'd have a pizza with the ingredients from a kebab on there. Or sushi is weirdly big in Italy. And at least from my own personal observations, those were the dishes that native Italians were drawn to interact with these immigrant communities. Otherwise, they didn't really connect with them. So do you think that, there's this exchange, this evolution of food, how do you think that can help people become united and accept people from different backgrounds?
That's a good question. I think in our country, we can see that most of the, I don't like the word ethnic, because that's like saying, oh, you're different from me, so you're ethnic. But most of the cuisines that are not colonial American, Native American, that have come from other places, those restaurants, the hole-in-the-wall places, the exciting new places with new flavors have all been started by immigrants. And it's how the immigrants get a footing in this country and begin to have some economic security. and they become beloved in the community. And through the food, people get to know the families who are usually tremendously hardworking and working there all the time. And they know the families, and there might be an entree into that community. It's what you were talking about. So it's a wonderful way to, it's not that they necessarily assimilate into mainstream American culture because they keep their food, or they take American food and they do wonderfully crazy things with it, but it opens up new worlds, I think, for people who, in some very remote town in North Dakota, to have a Laotian restaurant really broadens their world and makes them think about other people and open themselves up to new experiences. And I do feel that once you open yourself up to one kind of new experience, it just releases something, and then you're perhaps open to other kinds.
I love this idea that people can share their culture and community through their food. So while food's links to identity can divide, it can also connect. But sometimes conflict happens because of food needs. Here's our conversation about that.
So earlier, kind of shifting gears, we talked a little bit about, food being national identity and some of the conflicts that, you've observed. Are there any kind of bigger historical conflicts you can think of that were started over food?
I would dare to say that just about every war is because people in one place want the better soil in another place so that they can have the better crops, or they want access to water where they can have more fish, or it's really about food and getting the land to grow it, or the water that sustains fish and shellfish and stuff like that. So yes, a lot has to do with religion, but much of it has to do with food. And it certainly in the case of Russia and Ukraine, as I mentioned, Ukraine has extraordinary soil, or it did. I mean, it's been really devastated by all the munitions that have fallen. But, Russia wanted that breadbasket.
Interesting. So really, access to food is a big driver of conflict, it seems.
And I might add that it's the biggest driver of migration, and the influx of migrants throughout the world that then leads to political problems because countries don't want all these outsiders. They came because they were hungry, and there wasn't enough to eat. I mean, they also might have been persecuted for political or religious reasons, but a lot of it is hunger-driven.
As we came to the end of our conversation, I had to ask Darra if she had any advice or ideas on how we can help unify through food.
So I know you personally believe in the power of food to help unify people. So what practical advice would you give our listeners on how to unify through food?
Oh, well, as I mentioned, it's not going to really change the geopolitical craziness of the world at the moment, but I think that the more open we can be to the foods of others, the more welcoming we can be to people to share our table with them, the more we can remember to share food with people in need. I think all of that is a way of using food to positive ends.
Interesting. So do you have any kind of final thoughts on unifying people through food, just kind of as we draw to a close?
Well, I keep coming back to another country that I've spent a lot of time in and that I really love, and that's Georgia in the Caucasus, which has a very, very ancient tradition of what they call the supra, which is a feast. And Georgia is the birthplace of wine, and they make really fantastic wine. And there's always a lot of wine and singing and dancing. But at this supra, there is a special toastmaster called a tamada who leads the toasts in an official capacity. And unlike the way most of us toast, at the beginning of a meal, we'll say cheers or welcome or whatever. This is very formalized, and it's almost like giving speeches or reading poetry, except it's not read, it's declaiming it. And the thing that is partly most significant to me, besides the beauty of all that, is that whoever is there at the table, so the tamada says something about each of them. So it's almost like a source of the latest news in the community. So you know what's happened, like someone got an A on a test, or someone got a new job, or someone lost their cousin. It could be any number of happy or sad things, but it draws people together. And with each toast, there is more wine drunk, and it just creates this amazing community. And I think that sharing of information is a very beautiful thing. And it also, Georgia was invaded over the centuries just so many times. And it was a way of affirming Georgian identity. We are Georgian, and we are here, and we are celebrating around the table, and we will continue to be victorious in doing so. And their toast, the way we say cheers, means victory.
Whether it is sharing a meal with your family, friends, or even a mortal enemy, food draws us together. Food lies at the core of who we are and where we come from. Our culture, traditions, belief, our very self. It is up to us to be companions through being together with bread. Now that's a meal that will leave a good taste in your mouth. The Dark Side of Dining is a production of Food for Thought Audio. This episode was written, produced, and edited by me, Kenny Mears. I'd like to thank today's guest, Darra Goldstein, for sharing her insights with us. Darra is an author and speaker, and you can find more information on Darra at darragoldstein.com, or follow her on social media. Links will be in the show notes. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X, or wherever you get your podcasts for more content. And until next time, thanks for listening.